A millionaire CEO used to sealing billion-dollar deals never imagined his biggest surprise would come from a soccer ball rolling to his feet, along with a boy who looked eerily familiar. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel and let's get started. He could have stayed one more hour in that high-rise boardroom, approving merger documents and sipping overpriced lattes. But instead, Matthew Pierce, a millionaire CEO with a reputation for icy composure, decided to do something radically out of character. He took a rare afternoon pause, not in his sleek Manhattan penthouse, nor in the executive lounge of a private club, but at Central Park. That's how the story begins. The early autumn sun painted streaks of gold on the grass and trees. The city's usual roar softened here, replaced by children's laughter, joggers panting and dogs barking as they chased each other in wide loops across the lawns. Clad in a tailored charcoal suit and Italian leather shoes, Matthew felt strangely out of place among the t-shirted tourists and families on blankets. Yet something inside him urged him to linger. Maybe it was the memory of simpler times he'd mostly buried under quarterly earnings and official dinners. Or perhaps an unspoken loneliness weighed on him, a sensation that money and success had never quite managed to silence. He found a bench near a playground away from the main walking path where paparazzi might occasionally stake out celebrities. He needed to think. Business expansions, rumors of a hostile takeover, even a flicker of ennui, none of it felt quite right. Something about the day's restlessness whispered that his life was on the cusp of changing forever. Just then, a soccer ball arced through the air, a perfect shot from a small foot. It soared over the fence surrounding the playground, bounced on the paved walkway, and rolled decisively toward Matthew's bench. Almost reflexively, he stuck out a polished shoe to stop it. The ball bumped against his toe with a soft thud. A boy, maybe 6 or 7 years old, came dashing over, cheeks flushed. He wore grass-stained shorts, slightly scuffed sneakers, and had hair that stuck out in all directions as though it had never met a comb. Unlike the average city child, the boy's features were an echo of Matthew's own. The same sharp cheekbones, the same deep-set eyes. Matthew froze in place. He couldn't pinpoint why this child's gaze made his breath catch. "Sorry, mister," the boy panted, looking abashed as he retrieved the ball. "Didn't mean to hit you." Matthew opened his mouth to utter some polished courtesy, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he coughed out a simple, "No harm done." Even that sounded odd in his throat. The boy thanked him with a grin that was inexplicably familiar. Matthew watched in stunned silence as the child turned and sprinted back toward a young woman, tall, slender, wearing a faded jacket and jeans, who stood under a tree. Her auburn hair caught in a breeze, and for a moment she locked eyes with Matthew. Those eyes widened ever so slightly, as though she recognized him from a memory or from one of the countless press features that showcased the city's most powerful CEOs. Something about her reaction was not just familiarity, but fear. With subtle urgency, she placed a hand on the boy's shoulder and guided him away in the opposite direction. Matthew caught himself rising from the bench as if to follow, confusion swirling in his chest. The abrupt sense that these people, this boy, were not random strangers gnawed at his composure. But a phone call shattered the moment. He fished out the device, saw the name of an important investor flashing on the screen, and forced himself to remain. That night, back in his penthouse suite, the sky seemed unusually dark. Matthew found himself pacing the living room, ignoring the magnificent skyline shimmering through floor-to-ceiling windows. A memory assaulted him, half-formed, the shape of a face he'd seen years ago, a single line from a letter whose contents he'd long refused to read. He pushed the thought away, focusing instead on the relentless hum of business demands. Usually, contracts and deals were a refuge, but tonight, they provided no comfort. He caught his reflection in the mirrored side of a glass cabinet, eyes shadowed, jaw clenched. In that reflection, he saw once again the fleeting image of the child from the park. Same color eyes, same stubborn tilt of the chin. He swallowed hard. Was it possible? No, he told himself firmly. He had no children, at least none he was aware of. He'd never wanted them. Or so he told himself every time he signed a check or parted ways with an ex whose dreams of family clashed with his unstoppable corporate climb. In the gloom of half-lit corridors, he wandered toward his study. On a mahogany shelf, tucked behind rows of business manuals and framed awards, sat a single photograph in a sleek silver frame. It was an older picture taken in his final year of college. Standing beside him was a young woman, Hannah Moore. She had laughed easily, dreamt aloud, and wore her heart on her sleeve. He had once loved her deeply, or at least believed he did. The relationship had ended abruptly, overshadowed by his burgeoning empire and an argument so heated he still remembered the final echo of the door slam. Hannah had vanished from his life, and he, consumed by ambition, had let her go without a second glance. The last time they spoke, she seemed determined to tell him something. But the memory was hazy now. His hand trembled slightly as he picked up the photo. Could it be that Hannah had... No, it made no sense. She would never keep a secret like that, would she? His father had died when he was a teenager, and he knew too well what it felt like to be left in the dark about paternal responsibilities. A surge of guilt made him set the frame face down, unable to stare at the truth it threatened to unravel. The next morning, he arranged an early schedule to review new acquisition proposals. His personal assistant droned on about expansions in Europe, profit margins, and board approvals. Yet Matthew's mind strayed. Over and over, the same pair of eyes haunted him. It took an iron will to maintain his usual corporate bravado, forging smiles at the right moments and giving crisp instructions. Meanwhile, an invisible storm churned in his mind. Find them. The compulsion sprouted from the pit of his stomach like an unruly weed. It was a routine coffee break, something Matthew often skipped, but he needed a moment to think. He sat in a sleek lounge, sipping black coffee from a porcelain cup that probably cost more than the average family's monthly grocery bill. He didn't even taste it. Instead, he scrolled through his phone, searching old contact lists, news archives, anything that could lead him to Hannah Moore. She wasn't on social media under her old name, nor did her prior address appear on any public record. It was as if she'd vanished. "Sir, you have that conference call at 11, his assistant reminded him timidly. He checked the time, 10:56, 4 minutes before he had to greet a half-dozen clients from overseas. Yet he found himself pulling the phone back, typing Hannah Moore NYC into a search bar one more time, hoping for a clue. Nothing. With a muted curse, he headed to the meeting, his polished corporate facade sliding back into place. After an hour of discussing expansions and exchange rates, Matthew excused himself, feigning an urgent personal matter. He made a beeline for the elevator that led to his private office suite. On the ride up, he felt his heart pound. For the first time, it wasn't a board vote or an investor's flight arrival that turned his pulse erratic. It was the pang of paternal uncertainty. Might that boy actually be his? Reaching his office, he swiftly closed the door, pressed his palms flat against the sleek wooden surface. He inhaled deeply. On his desk, a single file demanded attention. Once more, the ghost of Hannah's silhouette flickered in his mind. He forced himself to focus. If anyone could unearth Hannah, it would be the private detective whose number he'd kept stashed away for extreme emergencies. Risking every ounce of pride, he dialed. "Yes, this is Matthew Pierce. I need you to locate someone," he said, voice carefully controlled. He gave the name Hannah Moore. "From about 7 years ago. No, I don't have her current details. She could be anywhere." His jaw tightened as he listened to the detective's instructions. "And there might be a child involved." He ended the call, feeling exposed. Hiring a PI to track down an ex-girlfriend wasn't a scenario he'd ever imagined. But he wasn't about to wait passively while an unthinkable possibility haunted him day and night. If that boy in the park was truly his son, the ramifications were colossal. Not just financial obligations, but the concept of fatherhood, a role he'd deliberately locked away in a dusty corner of his life plans. Night fell again before the detective's first report came in. Sparse, but something. Hannah Moore had indeed left town nearly 7 years ago, turned up once in a small city upstate, worked at a boutique, and then moved again. Always one step ahead of the system. No mention of the child, but the detective assured him they would keep digging. Restless and uncertain, Matthew tried to sleep but only managed a few hours. His dreams were peppered with half-remembered college scenes, Hannah in a library corridor saying she had big news and him cutting her off because he'd just received a critical job offer. He woke up covered in cold sweat. The next morning, the polished floors of his private penthouse echoed every footstep like an accusation. Trying to distract himself, he turned on the TV. Headlines about corporate deals, celebrity gossip, and world events flickered by. Then, as if mocking him, a local news segment aired a short clip of Central Park. The same playground, the same bench. He saw children sprinting after soccer balls, a fleeting shot that made him blink. The newscaster mentioned an upcoming park festival. Matthew turned off the TV, swallowing an unsteady breath. Whatever it would take, he had to find Hannah. He had to find that child. Because if the faintest chance existed that the boy who'd kicked a soccer ball into his life was his own flesh and blood, there was no going back to business as usual. And so began the internal unraveling of a man who thought he had everything: wealth, success, endless possibilities. But there are lines in life money can't erase. A father's duty, a son's right to know the man who contributed half his DNA, the heartbreak of an old flame who might have endured years of single parenthood in the shadows. Pieces of a puzzle fell around him, and as he reached for them, he felt both terror and a strange, dawning hope. Hannah Moore had once been known for her sparkle. She could walk into a college cafeteria wearing old jeans and still draw everyone's eye with her easy laughter and genuine warmth. But those who saw her now, living in a cramped one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of Manhattan, would hardly recognize her. The circles under her eyes spoke of exhaustion, the slight stoop in her shoulders of burdens carried for far too long. That morning, as dawn's pale light filtered through threadbare curtains, Hannah sat at the small kitchen table with an assortment of bills spread out in front of her: utilities, overdue rent, and a medical invoice from her son's last checkup. Her hands trembled when she realized the total was more than she had in her meager bank account. She exhaled shakily, pressing her fingers to her temples, trying to will away the inevitable headache. In the other room, Ethan was still asleep, curled up with the same faded teddy bear he'd had since he was old enough to babble. Hannah let her gaze drift to the partially closed door, guilt gnawing at her. The child needed new clothes, new shoes, maybe even a break from her constant worry, but finances were always on a razor's edge. Her mind drifted to the previous day's unsettling event at Central Park. Of all the people in this vast city, her son had managed to kick a soccer ball straight toward Matthew Pierce. Hannah had watched, heart pounding, as Ethan approached the tall figure in the impeccable suit. She'd heard enough about Matthew over the years, always on the news, in magazines, hailed as some financial wizard. She'd recognized him in an instant, and from the way he'd stared at Ethan as though struck by lightning, she was almost certain he'd suspected something. Hannah had grabbed Ethan's shoulder and fled before the conversation went any deeper. But how long could she keep this secret? Her entire existence since she left college was defined by one monumental choice: keeping silent about Ethan's father. Pride, fear, and heartbreak had tangled to form that decision. And now it felt like a fragile bubble on the verge of popping. She rubbed her tired eyes, remembering their last argument years ago. She'd tried to tell Matthew about the pregnancy, but he'd cut her off to prioritize some urgent business call. Or maybe it was a job interview or an investor meeting. She no longer recalled the specifics, only that his ambition overshadowed her every word. Stung, she'd slipped out the door, vanishing from his life before he could notice or object. She'd never even uttered the words, "I'm pregnant." A sudden knock rattled the flimsy apartment door. Instantly, Hannah tensed. Usually, visitors meant only one thing: trouble. She peered through the peephole and exhaled relief upon seeing her friend and neighbor, Jade, standing in the dim hallway. Jade was a nurse who worked irregular hours, often bringing leftover hospital sandwiches or half-priced groceries when Hannah was too strapped to shop properly. "Morning," Jade said softly, stepping inside. She held up a small bag of oranges. "Figured Ethan could use some vitamin C. That cold last week still has me worried." Hannah murmured her thanks, leading her friend into the kitchen. Jade's gaze flicked to the bills scattered across the table, her expression sympathetic. "Rent's due soon, right?" Hannah nodded, biting her lip. "I'm behind already, and I'm working extra shifts at the boutique, but they've been cutting back staff hours. There's just not enough." Jade hesitated, weighing how much to say. At last she touched Hannah's arm. "You know, if that job posting at the hospital cafeteria is still open, maybe—" "That's not guaranteed either," Hannah interjected quietly. "Besides, it pays about the same as what I make now, and I'd have to figure out new childcare arrangements for Ethan." Her tone softened. "Thanks for the concern, but I'll manage." Jade nodded, though her eyes brimmed with worry. She pulled out a battered envelope from her scrub's pocket. "Look, I know you hate handouts, but this is just a little something from the staff fund. They do it for employees with hardships sometimes, and—" "No," Hannah said firmly, pushing the envelope back. "I can't accept it. You already do so much, Jade." Their conversation was cut short by a sleepy Ethan wandering in, rubbing his eyes. He blinked at Jade, then mumbled a drowsy greeting. Hannah's heart twisted when she noticed how the hem of his pajamas rode too high on his ankles. He was outgrowing clothes faster than she could afford to replace them. Ethan yawned, giving his mother a bright, trusting smile that nearly broke her. At that moment, a text pinged on Hannah's phone. She glanced at the screen, frowning. Her manager had changed her shift again, calling her in unexpectedly that afternoon. She set the phone aside, resigned. "I have to go in earlier today. Jade, would you mind watching Ethan for an hour until—" "Of course," Jade replied. "Just drop him by on your way out." Once Jade left, Hannah turned to Ethan, ruffling his hair. "Hey, buddy, how about breakfast?" she asked, trying to inject a bit of cheer. He nodded eagerly. "Cereal?" She laughed, though it sounded a bit hollow. "Cereal it is." As she poured the milk, she stole a sidelong glance at him. How was she supposed to protect him if Matthew ever decided to stake a claim? She knew just enough about Matthew's lifestyle to suspect that his lawyers could bury her if he chose to assert paternal rights. She'd seen news segments praising him for philanthropic gestures, but that hardly erased the memory of his sharp-edged ambition. He'd once said to her face, "Don't distract me with petty drama. I'm trying to build a future." She could only imagine how a fight over a child might go if he learned the truth. But another part of her, one that she'd shoved deep inside for years, asked an unsettling question. Didn't Ethan deserve to know his father? Could it actually be more harmful to keep them apart indefinitely? She swallowed hard, forcing the thought to the back of her mind. Too many complexities swirled around that possibility. Her own pride, Matthew's track record, Ethan's confusion if he discovered everything so abruptly. Meanwhile, across town, Matthew was living out an oddly parallel morning. He was in his executive suite, eyes scanning a terse email from the private investigator. Hannah Moore believed to be in the city, possibly in a low-rent neighborhood. No formal record of child, but neighbors mentioned seeing a boy. The email included an address dangerously close to the boutique district, ironically near one of his company's real estate projects. Matthew stared at the words, heart pounding. So it was true. She was here in Manhattan, scraping by, and there was indeed mention of a child, though no official record. Something in him sank. How had he not known she was living so close? He ended up rescheduling a conference call and instructing his assistant to hold all non-urgent messages. Slipping on a more casual jacket, he left the skyscraper at midday, an unthinkable move for the infamous workaholic. The city's midday bustle felt charged with significance as he hailed a cab and rattled off the address from the PI's email. The driver glanced in the rearview, raising a brow at the upscale suit heading into a decidedly un-upscale area, but said nothing. 20 minutes later, Matthew stepped out onto a street lined with discount stores, payday loan shops, and a scattering of closed storefronts. The place had a faintly desperate feel to it. His polished shoes felt out of place on the cracked sidewalk. He spotted a boutique with a scuffed sign reading, "Lucy's Fashions." According to the PI, Hannah sometimes worked there. Through the glass window, he glimpsed a row of dresses on mannequins and a tall figure with auburn hair rearranging a display rack. He almost pressed a hand to the glass, but instead paused. Anxiety warred with curiosity. Did he dare walk in unannounced? If she recognized him, how would she react? Inside, the store felt dim and cramped. Motes of dust floated in the sunlight that streamed through the window. A bell chimed above the door as Matthew entered. Hannah turned, arms full of pastel blouses. For a moment, neither spoke. It was like stepping back in time. Her eyes widened, and the color drained from her face. She set the blouses down on the counter, chest heaving. "Matthew," she breathed, her voice almost lost in the hum of the store's fluorescent lights. He took a step forward, feeling his pulse thunder at his throat. "Hannah," he managed quietly. Then he paused. Now that he was here, all the questions he'd rehearsed in his mind seemed to vanish. How do you casually ask if a child is yours when you haven't spoken to the mother in almost 7 years? Hannah seemed equally speechless. She eyed the store's back door, as if considering flight, but something held her in place. Finally, she cleared her throat. "I didn't think I'd ever see you again." "I know," he said softly, voice constricted. "I'm sorry to show up like this. I saw a boy at the park, Hannah. He looked like me." Her face twisted in a mix of pain, anger, and something unnameable. She pressed her lips together until they blanched. The tension in the air felt electric, snapping with every breath. Each second threatened to unravel them both. Outside, the city life continued unabated. But here, in the cramped boutique that smelled of old fabric and dust, the past and present converged. Neither knew what would happen next. Yet they both realized, with bone-deep certainty, that no matter how they tried, they couldn't escape the truth anymore. A strained silence suffused the cramped boutique. Hannah could practically feel the sharp edges of her past cutting through the air. For 7 years, she had dreaded this moment, imagining it, sometimes even craving it, but never truly believing it would happen. Yet here was Matthew Pierce, larger than life and at the same time clearly shaken, his intense gaze fixed on her with questions he couldn't yet voice. She tried to steady her breathing, to quiet the rawness in her chest. Her mind flashed back to the last time they'd spoken in person. The memory stung. She'd been trying to utter the words, "I'm pregnant," voice quaking with a blend of terror and hope. But Matthew had been inundated with the hustle of his meteoric rise, some urgent call about a business deal, she recalled. He'd cut her off, never truly hearing the news she wanted to share. That day she'd walked out, sure that whatever dreams they had for a future had disintegrated in the wake of his unstoppable ambition. Now, he stood mere feet away. The overhead lighting cast a hard reflection on his slicked-back hair, highlighting the tension in his face. In those intervening years, he had become a public figure. She had glimpsed him on news segments, read about him in magazines, She'd watched him transform into the epitome of wealth and influence, and with each new article praising his brilliance, she'd reminded herself that she'd made the right choice. He was a man who had no space in his life for a child. But her resolve felt perilously thin at this moment. Because Ethan existed, Ethan, who had Matthew's bone structure, and even the same determined set to his mouth when he was focused on something, and they had crossed paths in Central Park in a way that felt almost fated. Hannah swallowed, steeling herself. "I'm working," she managed, voice laced with forced calm. She glanced around the shop. "My manager is on a break, but she'll be back soon. We can't—" Matthew leaned forward, expression serious. "Hannah, we need to talk, properly." His voice was subdued, as though speaking any louder might break the fragile bubble around them. "I've been looking for you." She exhaled, pressing her palms against the countertop. "Yeah, I guessed as much." Then, more quietly, "What do you want?" His gaze flicked to the curtained doorway leading to the back storeroom. Lowering his voice, he answered, "I want the truth. About him." She stiffened. Fear and anger roiled in her belly. "You have no right." "Don't I?" he interrupted, brow furrowing. "If that boy at the park is mine—" "Stop!" Hannah hissed, flicking a quick glance around to ensure no customers were in earshot. Her heart slammed against her ribs. A chaotic swirl of regret and fury warred in her chest. "This is not the place for that. You can't just show up here and expect me to unravel everything that's happened." Matthew's eyes darkened as he took in her words. For a moment he looked genuinely unsure of himself, which was something Hannah wouldn't have thought possible. "Then, meet me tonight," he said quietly. "Somewhere. Anywhere you choose." A rush of panic nearly overwhelmed her. Could she handle seeing him again, away from the protective barrier of her job? Did she have a choice? Because if she refused, he might try something more drastic, like returning with lawyers or turning up at her apartment. She didn't even want to imagine him knocking on her door, discovering Ethan's belongings scattered around. She needed to maintain some level of control over this conversation. She pressed her lips together. "Fine. There's a diner a few blocks from here. Phoebe's Diner. I can meet you after my shift ends at 7. For the first time, he seemed to relax the slightest bit, relief washing over his features. "Thank you," he murmured. "I'll be there." He moved to leave but paused as if he wanted to say something more, something about how he'd spent years in the dark, or how the fleeting glimpse of the boy had changed his life. But no words came. He simply nodded and walked out of the boutique, shoulders squared like a soldier heading off to uncertain battle. Hannah stood there, breathing heavily. Her manager, Lucy, an older woman with perpetually tired eyes, chose that moment to return. She raised an eyebrow at the store's door. "Customer?" she asked. "Just left," Hannah managed, voice shaky. Then she forced a bright note. "Anything you need me to do?" Lucy frowned, clearly sensing the tension. But she let it go, assigning Hannah to recheck inventory. Hannah drifted through the aisles, scanning tags and adjusting blouses on hangers, yet her mind was consumed by the realization that she was about to face Matthew in just a few hours, and that everything she'd kept hidden would soon be laid bare. By the time her shift ended, her nerves were frayed. She stopped by Jade's apartment, where Ethan was cheerfully coloring at the kitchen table. He ran to hug her leg, brimming with stories about the cartoons he'd watched. Jade, reading the stress on Hannah's face, gently asked, "Everything okay?" Hannah paused, glancing at Ethan's innocent expression. I just have to meet someone about a job. Maybe. Could you watch him a bit longer, please?" She hated lying, but the truth was too explosive to share even with her closest friend. Jade nodded. "Of course. Take your time." Hannah pressed a grateful kiss to Ethan's forehead and grabbed her jacket. On her way out, she tried to calm the thudding of her heart. There was no easy way to do this, no pre-written script for how to tell a powerful ex that he was a father. The street felt oddly cold for late afternoon. She barely registered the passing cars, the voices of people scurrying along the sidewalks. Her thoughts were pinned on the diner and the man who waited there. Half of her wanted to turn around, scoop Ethan into her arms, and vanish again. But she'd done that once, and it was no longer an option. Ethan had already glimpsed the father who had haunted Hannah's nightmares and daydreams alike. Outside Phoebe's diner, she paused, inhaling the smell of fried onions and lingering coffee. The neon sign flickered overhead, an awkward hum cutting through the city noise. She spotted Matthew through the glass, seated in a booth at the far corner, obviously waiting. Taking one last steadying breath, she pushed open the door. Her entry drew his attention. He stood, an old gesture of courtesy, then sat back down once she slid into the booth across from him. The waitress approached, but Hannah shook her head, not trusting her stomach with any food or coffee right now. Matthew, perhaps out of habit, ordered black coffee. The woman left, leaving them face to face in a hush brimming with unspoken pain. For a long moment they just stared at each other. Matthew looked older than she remembered, though still every bit as imposing. There were faint lines at the corners of his eyes, possibly from stress rather than laughter. She wondered if he noticed how different she was, too, tired, overshadowed by life's struggles. He finally broke the silence. "Hannah, about the boy. Please, tell me the truth." Her jaw clenched. She forced herself not to look away. "His name is Ethan. He's 6. Matthew nodded slowly, a pained understanding dawning in his eyes. "He's mine," he whispered, more statement than question. "Isn't he?" She pressed her lips together before speaking. "Yes," she admitted, voice tight. "He's your son." The words hung in the air, monumental. The waitress returned with coffee, oblivious to the emotional bomb that had just detonated. Matthew's hands trembled slightly as he curled them around the mug. He swallowed, searching her face for any indication that this might be some cruel joke. But he saw only exhaustion, regret, and a flicker of defiance. "Why didn't you tell me?" he managed, voice catching. "Why keep him hidden all these years?" Hannah felt a flash of anger spark. "Because you never gave me room," she murmured, fighting to keep her voice steady. "You were so consumed by your career, your deals, your investors. Anytime I tried to talk about something personal, you brushed me off. Even the night I came to your apartment to tell you—" He winced, as though the recollection physically hurt him. "I was younger then, obsessed with success," he admitted, voice low. "I didn't realize—" She let out a hollow laugh, cutting him off. "You didn't realize because you didn't care to. You were unreachable, Matthew, so I left." Regret carved lines in his features. He sipped the coffee, though it was clear he hardly tasted it. "And afterward? For 6 years, Hannah? You never thought to call me or send a letter?" She bristled, leaning forward. "Oh, I thought about it 1,000 times, but you know what else I thought about? The moment you told me not to bother you with petty drama. How you'd made it clear your business deals mattered more than anything or anyone. I convinced myself that dragging you into parenthood you didn't want would be cruel. Not just to you, but to Ethan. If a father can't show up fully, it's worse than having none at all." His eyes fluttered shut for a moment as if absorbing the blow. When he opened them again, the rawness of his guilt was unmistakable. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, barely audible over the soft clatter of the diner. "I was blind. But I want to see him, Hannah. My son." She clenched her fists under the table, nails digging into her palms. "You might want that now," she said quietly. "But what about tomorrow, or next month, or next year? You can't barge into his life like you barged in here. Expect everything to be perfect, then vanish when business calls. If you do that, you'll break him, and I won't let that happen." Matthew's voice trembled with urgency. "I wouldn't vanish. I know I have a lot to prove, but Ethan deserves—" "What does he deserve?" Her question hit him with the force of truth. "To be a side note on your corporate ladder? A trophy you trot out when you want to look charitable? Or a child who is actually loved and nurtured day after day, with no conditions? He stared down at his coffee, struggling. She realized with a jolt that he truly had no idea what fatherhood entailed. All those years of board meetings and acquisitions had never prepared him for the reality of reading bedtime stories or patching up skinned knees. And yet the desperate sincerity in his eyes suggested he wanted to try. In the corner of the diner, an old jukebox clicked to life, playing a soft tune from some decades-old pop ballad. Hannah sighed. The truth was that part of her still ached for the possibility of Ethan having a real father. She'd fought tooth and nail to do it alone, but it had been heartbreakingly difficult. If Matthew was being honest now, if he truly wanted to step up, didn't Ethan deserve that chance? "Look," Hannah finally said, voice calmer, "I won't give you a definitive answer tonight, but I'll consider letting you see him carefully, under my terms. That's all I can promise for now." Matthew blinked, relief sparking in his eyes. "Thank you," he said softly. I promise I won't make you regret it. Just let me be part of his life, Hannah." She nodded, though her heart pounded with trepidation. "We'll take it step by step. I need time." They lapsed into a silence laden with unresolved tension, yet also, for the first time, a fragile bridge of understanding. Their conversation continued in low voices for another hour, mostly around practicalities. Hannah spelled out what she expected if he wanted to meet Ethan. Matthew listened intently, already offering potential solutions, like scaling back certain travel commitments or setting up a private arrangement without tabloids swarming. Hannah left the diner that evening with her mind swirling in confusion. None of this was easy, and it brought old wounds roaring back to life. But as she walked the dim streets back to Jade's place, she couldn't escape a small, flickering hope. Maybe Ethan could have a father who tried, if not a perfect father. Maybe she could let go of some part of her anger. And maybe, just maybe, Matthew could learn that success doesn't always come in dollars and deals, but in the quiet, tender responsibility of caring for someone who depends on you. That night, Hannah barely slept. She'd left Phoebe's diner with her mind in turmoil, unsure whether she'd made the right choice. The possibility of letting Matthew back into her life, well, not her life specifically, but Ethan's, was a terrifying leap. It felt like stepping onto a frozen lake, never certain whether the surface would hold or shatter beneath her. She returned to Jade's apartment well past Ethan's usual bedtime. Her friend gave a supportive smile but didn't pry, sensing the tension. Hannah murmured her thanks, gathered Ethan's backpack of crayons and toys, and thanked Jade again as they slipped out into the cool night. In her own small apartment, Hannah tucked Ethan in. The boy blinked sleepily, hugging his faded teddy bear. "Mommy?" he asked in a soft voice. "Yes, baby." She perched on the edge of the bed, stroking his hair. "I saw the man in the park again, in my dreams," he mumbled, eyes fluttering. "Why did he look at me like that?" Hannah's heart twisted. Even in sleep, Ethan had sensed something strange about the man who stopped his soccer ball. But how to explain? She hadn't decided how or when to tell him about Matthew yet. "He was probably just surprised you kicked that ball so well," she whispered, forcing a light tone. "You're a good soccer player." Ethan managed a sleepy smile. In a few moments he drifted off, breathing softly. Hannah watched his small chest rise and fall, mind spinning with what-ifs. She pressed a kiss to his forehead and slipped back into the living room, sinking onto the sagging sofa. The city lights from the window illuminated the room enough to see the stack of unpaid bills on the table. A wave of exhaustion and worry threatened to consume her. Meanwhile, at the top of a gleaming skyscraper across the city, Matthew Pierce was also wide awake. He was perched in his office, long after most employees had gone home, staring at documents he could barely process. A single desk lamp cast shadows along the polished surface, accentuating the tension in his posture. He scrolled through pending emails. One from the head of acquisitions needed urgent approval. Another from the chief financial officer demanded an update on negotiations with a foreign investor. Ordinarily, he'd handle these tasks with swift precision. Tonight he closed his laptop instead, mind far from typical corporate deals. He kept replaying Hannah's words about Ethan. He's 6 years old, he's your son. Like a broken record, the ache in his chest felt unfamiliar. He was used to cutting through obstacles, making swift decisions and controlling outcomes. This, though, was an entirely different battlefield. Becoming a father overnight, well, not overnight in literal terms, but in the sense that he'd lived 6 years in ignorance, was unlike any business deal. There were no spreadsheets that spelled out how to earn a child's trust, no carefully negotiated contract that guaranteed paternal love. Rubbing his temples, Matthew forced himself to think rationally. He'd promised Hannah he wouldn't vanish or steamroll her. But how to prove that? He had no experience. His own father had died when Matthew was still in high school. There was no template for what a good dad looked like. Could he learn quickly enough not to let Ethan down? Rising from his office chair, he stepped to the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of Manhattan's glittering skyline. For years, he had gazed at that view with satisfaction and ambition. Tonight, it felt hollow. He would trade a chunk of his empire, he realized suddenly, if it meant making up for the time he'd lost with his son. A restless dawn broke over the city. Hannah woke with a knot of worry. This was her usual routine, but the knot felt bigger today. The moment Ethan's alarm clock beeped, he bounded into the living room, eyes bright. "Cereal, Mom?" he asked. She forced a smile. "Sure, then I'll walk you to school before I head to work." While he chattered about math class and recess, Hannah's mind drifted. She had Lucy's boutique in the afternoon, but she'd asked for a morning shift arrangement if possible. Her manager had said maybe next week, but not yet. So for now, she'd juggle drop-offs, pickups, and rely on Jade if she couldn't make it in time. Once Ethan was occupied watching cartoons in the living room, Hannah's phone buzzed. She braced herself, expecting a text from Lucy about scheduling. Instead, it was Matthew's number, one she'd never saved but recognized from the fleeting call he'd made to confirm their diner meeting. Her pulse kicked up. The message read, "Matthew, 7:25 a.m. Good morning. I hope you don't mind me texting. I wondered if we could discuss a plan for me to meet Ethan, on your terms, of course, whenever you feel ready." Hannah exhaled, heart thudding. She typed back carefully, "Hannah, 7:27 a.m. I'm not sure yet. Let me figure out a schedule that won't confuse him or disrupt things. I'll let you know soon." Her finger hovered over send. Everything in her was wary about letting him get too close. But still, Ethan had the right to know. She pressed the button, sealing the text. She could practically sense Matthew's relief from across the city, even though no immediate reply came. That same morning, Jade stopped by, carrying a small container of leftover soup and a broad smile. "Hey, I'm off for a couple hours," she said, placing the container in Hannah's fridge. "I can help with Ethan if you need." "Thanks," Hannah said with genuine gratitude. She hesitated, then decided Jade deserved some partial truth. "Ethan's dad is back in the picture. Sort of." Jade's eyes widened. "It's complicated," Hannah added. Jade stifled her shock. "Well, wow, are you okay?" Hannah shrugged. "I don't know yet, it's a lot. I have to figure out how to let them meet without throwing Ethan into chaos." Jade considered that. "You've done a great job raising him alone, Hannah. But if his dad genuinely wants to be involved..." She gave a meaningful glance. "Maybe that could be good. Still, you know him best. Just protect yourself and your boy." Hannah nodded, touched by Jade's concern. "That's the plan." At midday, Hannah found herself at the boutique, reorganizing a display of discount jackets. Lucy was in the back, wrestling with inventory spreadsheets. The store had few customers, leaving Hannah's mind free to brood about her next steps. Her phone stayed in her pocket, though she glanced at it every so often, half dreading another message from Matthew. She still hadn't decided how to orchestrate a first meeting between Ethan and his father. Should Matthew come by the apartment for a quiet introduction, or meet them at a public place, like a park, where Ethan might not feel cornered? Each option had pitfalls. Hannah worried about Ethan's reaction if Matthew tried too hard, or if he seemed disinterested, or if Ethan felt something was off. By mid-afternoon, Lucy emerged from the back, carrying a stack of dusty men's sweaters for clearance. "Hannah, can you hang these near the front display?" she asked. Her usual weary tone softened as she regarded her employee's tense posture. "You doing all right?" Hannah managed a weak smile. "I'm okay, just personal stuff." Lucy nodded with empathy. "We all have that. Let me know if you need an hour off or something. This place is slow anyway." Her manager's unexpected kindness nearly brought tears to Hannah's eyes. She mumbled her thanks and focused on the sweaters, carefully folding them so the store would look presentable. Despite the dim lighting and musty corners, Hannah felt a flicker of gratitude for the support Lucy offered, albeit in her own gruff way. After her shift, Hannah hurried to pick Ethan up from school. He emerged from the building chattering happily about his day. She grabbed his hand, leading him down the sidewalk. "Mom, can we go to the park?" he asked, eyes shining. "I want to practice more soccer kicks." Hannah's heart skipped. The last time they were at that park, fate had unleashed a storm of revelations. But she couldn't deny him. "Sure," she said gently. "Just for a bit." They strolled the few blocks to the park. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the grass. Ethan bounded toward a patch of open field, soccer ball in hand. Hannah trailed behind, scanning the faces around them as if half expecting Matthew to appear again. He did not. Still, the memory unsettled her. "Watch this, Mom," Ethan called, punting the ball. It soared, though not as far as that fateful day. He scurried after it, determined to master his technique. Hannah forced herself to relax, to smile at his delight. For a moment she could almost forget her worries. She found an empty bench near the field and sat, letting the warmth of the sun wrap around her. The vibrant laughter of children playing blended with distant traffic noises, creating a comforting hum. Soon Ethan trotted back, cheeks flushed from exertion. "Thirsty?" Hannah asked, offering a water bottle. He nodded vigorously, gulping it down. Then he paused, glancing at the bench. "Mom, do you remember that man who was sitting here before? The one I kicked the ball to?" Her breath caught. "Yes," she said slowly, uncertain how much to reveal. Ethan looked thoughtful. "He seemed nice. He didn't yell at me. He just looked surprised." He wrinkled his nose as if searching for the right word. "I feel like I've seen him before, but I can't remember." Hannah swallowed. The child was bright, perceptive in ways that sometimes startled her. She forced a smile. "Maybe he just reminded you of someone, sweetie." Ethan shrugged, apparently satisfied for now. "I guess. Can we do one more big kick before we go?" "Sure," Hannah answered, ruffling his hair. "Last one, then we head home." Later that evening, she found herself pacing the small kitchen while Ethan slept. She hovered over her phone, which remained maddeningly silent. Part of her almost expected Matthew to message again, pressing for a date or time to meet Ethan. Another part of her was relieved he hadn't yet, giving her space to breathe. Finally, just as she was about to turn in for the night, her phone buzzed. Her heart leapt unsteadily. It was from Matthew. "Matthew, 9:45 p.m. I don't want to rush you, but I want to make plans soon. Maybe a short meeting in a neutral place? I respect your caution. Let me know." Hannah stared at the text, tension coiling in her gut. This was the moment she'd been trying to define, how and where and when to let father and son meet. After several deep breaths, she typed a response, her fingers trembling. "Hannah, 9:49 p.m. Tomorrow evening, if the weather holds, at the same park near the playground, around 5, just for a short while. Understand that Ethan doesn't know who you are yet. Please, follow my lead. She hit send before she could second-guess herself. Her screen soon lit with a reply. Matthew, 9:51 p.m. Thank you. I'll be there. I promise I'll be respectful of whatever boundaries you set. Hannah locked her phone, then sank into the couch, adrenaline buzzing through her. Tomorrow evening, she would introduce Ethan to the father he'd never known. Even if it was only as a friend at first, it felt monumental. She closed her eyes, a swirl of anticipation and dread colliding in her chest. She wanted so badly to do right by her son, yet she couldn't quell the fear that reuniting with Matthew might shatter the fragile life she'd painstakingly built. In a cramped apartment far from the penthouse heights, a single mother prepared to reveal the secret she'd guarded for years. And in an opulent suite overlooking the city, a man who once believed power was the only prize worth chasing prepared to discover something infinitely more precious, the innocent love of a little boy. A mild early evening sun cast long, gentle shadows across the park grass. Children shrieked with laughter around the playground, racing each other from the monkey bars to the swings. The air carried a hint of cut grass, mingling with the sweet smell of a distant pretzel cart. Hannah stood near a bench by the small fountain, her pulse thudding in her ears. She spotted Matthew approaching from a corner of the park, his stride more hesitant than confident for once. He wasn't wearing one of his signature suits. Instead, he'd opted for casual trousers and a simple collared shirt. Even so, he stood out among the joggers and parents chasing toddlers. Perhaps it was the gravity in his posture, or the way he scanned the park with vigilant eyes. He caught sight of Hannah and gave a small wave, cautious, as if testing the air between them. Ethan was a few paces ahead of her, dribbling a soccer ball. Though Hannah had told him they might meet a friend today, she hadn't elaborated on who the friend was. She wanted to see how Matthew would interact with him under normal circumstances, without the pressure of fatherhood stamped on their every word. She tugged lightly on Ethan's hoodie, calling his name. The boy paused, looking up at her inquisitively. "I'd like you to meet someone," she said softly, throat tight. "He's, just a nice man I know, okay?" Ethan blinked, curiosity lighting his eyes. "Sure," he said with a shrug, hugging the soccer ball to his chest. Matthew reached them, greeting Hannah first with a subdued, "Hello." Then he turned to Ethan, summoning a warm smile. The boy squinted slightly as if trying to recall where he'd seen that face before. "Hey there," Matthew said quietly, his voice holding a faint tremor. I think we might have met once, at the park?" Ethan nodded. "Yeah, you're the guy who stopped my ball. That was a good save." Matthew managed a chuckle. "You've got a powerful kick. Surprised me." He glanced at Hannah briefly, as though seeking reassurance. She gave a slight nod, so Matthew continued, "What's your name?" He'd never heard Ethan's voice directed at him like this, never gotten the chance to do something as simple as an introduction. His stomach twisted in guilt and longing. "Ethan," the boy replied, balancing the ball on his hip. "Want to play?" Hannah's eyebrows lifted. She hadn't expected Ethan to so quickly extend an invitation. Perhaps children were more open to new faces than she'd feared, or maybe Ethan intuitively sensed something that made him comfortable. Either way, her heart squeezed. Letting out a cautious breath, she forced her shoulders to relax. "Let them have this moment," she told herself. Matthew cleared his throat. "Sure, if it's all right with your mom." He looked at Hannah. She nodded, keeping a close watch. Ethan bounced the ball to the ground and tapped it toward Matthew, waiting for a pass in return. What followed was a tentative, slightly awkward father-son soccer exchange, though only Hannah understood that deeper bond. Ethan darted around calling, "Over here, and pass it!" Matthew did his best to keep up, occasionally stumbling on the grass. He wasn't exactly an athlete, but he tried to match Ethan's energy. A light breeze picked up, rustling Hannah's hair. She folded her arms, a swirl of emotions tangling inside her. It struck her how natural Ethan looked, shouting instructions at a man who was, unknowingly, his father. And Matthew, though clearly out of his element, was trying to mirror the child's playful enthusiasm. His laughter sounded genuine, reverberating off the squeals of other kids in the park. At one point, Ethan kicked the ball a bit too hard. It soared across the field and landed near a group of teenagers chatting on a blanket. Matthew jogged after it, leaving Hannah and Ethan side by side. The boy grinned up at her, panting softly. "He's fun," Ethan remarked, wiping sweat from his forehead. "I like him." Hannah swallowed the thickness in her throat. Her eyes flicked to Matthew, who was retrieving the ball. The sensation of relief threatened to buckle her knees. For all her fears, Ethan wasn't running away or crying. He was intrigued, even excited. But it was far too soon to drop the revelation that Matthew was more than a friendly stranger. "Yeah," she said quietly, ruffling Ethan's hair. "He seems nice, doesn't he?" Matthew returned with the ball, hair slightly windswept. He offered it to Ethan with a crooked smile. "You might go pro one day," he teased. "I can't believe how fast you move." "Mom says I have lots of energy," Ethan replied, beaming. "She says I used to run before I could even walk." He paused, then gave Hannah a curious look. "Isn't that right, Mom?" She nodded, forcing a light laugh. "You were a handful, that's for sure." Matthew's expression flickered with what Hannah recognized as pain. He'd missed Ethan's first steps, and so many other firsts. She could almost see the regret etched on his face. Yet he kept his tone upbeat, congratulating Ethan on his skills and even suggesting a few playful dribbling drills. As the sky edged toward dusk, families began gathering their things. Hannah gestured to a nearby bench. "Let's sit for a bit," she said. "Ethan, get some water." The boy plopped down between them, gulping from a sports bottle. Meanwhile, Matthew cleared his throat again, the tension of adult conversation creeping back in. "So, Ethan," Matthew ventured, "what do you like to do besides soccer?" Ethan lit up, rattling off a list of interests, drawing comic superheroes, reading about outer space, occasionally helping his friend Jade bake cookies. Matthew's eyes shone with fascination, as though committing each word to memory. Hannah watched carefully, half expecting Matthew to overshare or pry. To her relief, he listened more than he talked. When Ethan launched into a mini-rant about how Pluto used to be called a planet but then scientists changed their minds, Hannah shot Matthew a sideways glance. He was smiling, thoroughly absorbed. She felt an odd pang. This was precisely how she'd pictured them if life had gone differently. Father and son, leaning in, sharing curious facts, maybe laughing at silly jokes. She swallowed and pushed that thought away, remembering that they were still on precarious ground. The orange hue of sunset brushed the treetops when Ethan finally hopped off the bench to dribble the ball again. Hannah watched him for a moment, ensuring he stayed within view. Then she turned to Matthew. "He's taking to you easily," she remarked, half question, half statement. Matthew nodded. I'm grateful. I was afraid he'd be wary or shy." Hannah fiddled with the hem of her jacket. "He's open-minded," she admitted. "But that doesn't mean we can just move fast. He doesn't know you're—" She hesitated, letting the words remain unspoken. Ethan's father. The label felt too loaded to voice here in public. Matthew lowered his gaze. "I understand. I won't push," he promised softly. "I only want what's best for him, and for you too." She appreciated the sentiment but didn't quite trust it yet. "We'll figure it out step by step," she replied. "I just need you to keep your word. No surprises." He nodded, glancing back at Ethan fondly. "Of course." They watched the boy happily entertaining himself. Dusk deepened, the streetlights flickering on. Families trickled out of the park. Hannah finally sighed, pulling the straps of her purse over her shoulder. "We should be heading home. He has school tomorrow, and, well, I have bills to pay." The last part slipped out unintentionally, a reflection of the stress that never fully lifted. Matthew started to speak, maybe to offer financial help, but Hannah shot him a warning look. They were nowhere near that point of trust. So he closed his mouth and simply stood. "Could I walk you both part way?" he asked. "Just until you catch your bus or a cab or however you're traveling?" Ethan, hearing the exchange, jumped in. "Yes, walk with us!" Hannah's chest tightened. Ethan's innocent enthusiasm made it difficult to keep strict boundaries, but she relented with a small nod. They strolled along the park's perimeter, the city's bustle swelling around them. Ethan chatted about his day at school, occasionally bursting ahead to show Matthew a fancy soccer trick or to point out a window display featuring superhero action figures. Matthew responded with genuine interest, even snapping a mental note of the store location, as if already thinking about gifts. Hannah noticed but kept silent. She couldn't deny Ethan's right to a father who might spoil him occasionally, yet it felt overwhelming. Soon they reached the avenue where Hannah typically caught the bus back to her neighborhood. She halted, turning to face Matthew. He paused awkwardly, one hand drifting to his side as if unsure whether to offer a handshake or a hug. Ethan, clueless to the deeper tension, piped up, "See you again soon, right?" Matthew's expression softened. "I'd like that," he said. Then, glancing at Hannah, "Only if it's okay with your mom." She inhaled slowly. "Yes, maybe next week we can arrange another park visit." She managed a small, genuine smile toward Ethan as if to reassure him. Her gaze flickered to Matthew's. "We can plan by text," she added, arms folded as a subtle reminder to keep personal lines from blurring. Matthew nodded. "Thank you." Then, more quietly, "For letting me have this time." Ethan waved, stepping onto the bus with Hannah right behind him. The doors hissed shut. Through the windows, Hannah saw Matthew standing on the sidewalk, hands in his pockets, staring after them until the bus pulled away. Inside, Ethan bounced onto a seat and talked a mile a minute about how he'd met a new friend, how they played soccer, and how the man knew all sorts of cool facts about business. Matthew had briefly casually mentioned working in an office. Hannah listened, offering occasional one-word responses. She felt something close to relief mixing with cautious hope, but also a stab of guilt that she'd introduced them under half-truths. Could she keep Matthew's identity hidden from Ethan for long? Was that even fair? She knew she'd have to tell him soon, once she was certain Matthew was committed. But how to break that news gently, in a way that wouldn't shatter the boy's sense of security? The bus jolted to a stop near their block. Leading Ethan down the dim street, Hannah offered the usual warnings. "Look both ways. Hold my hand." At their apartment door, Jade poked her head out from the next unit, raising an eyebrow at Hannah, probably curious about how the meeting had gone. Hannah just gave a tired nod, ushering Ethan inside. He collapsed onto the sofa, still riding the high of his new friend. Hannah forced a laugh. "Let's get you dinner, kiddo. Then homework, bath, bed, standard routine." She busied herself in the kitchen, heating up leftovers. The mundane tasks steadied her, a welcome break from the swirl of emotion. Across the living room, Ethan rummaged in his backpack for a drawing pad, humming a happy tune. She caught snippets of pencil scribbles and realized he was sketching a soccer scene, two figures kicking a ball on a patch of green. Night settled over the cramped apartment. Once Ethan was bathed and tucked in, Hannah slipped to her bedroom, leaning against the closed door. She pulled out her phone, noticing a single text from Matthew. "Matthew, 8:10 p.m. Thank you again. He's incredible. Let me know when I can see him next. And if you need anything, please don't hesitate." She inhaled sharply, her mind conjuring an image of his hopeful expression in the park. No matter how complicated, she couldn't deny how genuine he seemed. Slowly, she typed a reply. Hannah, 8:15 p.m. I'll think about it. We'll set something up soon. Setting the phone aside, she closed her eyes. In the quiet space, the day's events weighed on her. For now, Ethan was safe, happy, oblivious. Matthew was determined yet respectful, and she felt a mixture of relief and an unsettling vulnerability, because everything could still fall apart if Matthew failed to show consistent dedication, or if old wounds between them reopened in ways that hurt Ethan. Still, for the first time, she felt a faint spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, they could navigate this fragile bridge. Maybe a father, mother, and child could find some sort of connection despite the years lost. Only time would tell if that spark could bloom into something lasting, or if the shadows of regret would swallow it whole. The following week brought a flurry of cautious progress and quiet apprehension. Hannah had tentatively agreed to let Matthew see Ethan again, under the condition that it remain casual and low-key. No big announcements, no fancy gifts. She wanted Ethan's routine to stay as normal as possible. Yet beneath that rule lay a swirling sea of emotions, on Hannah's side and Matthew's. Even Ethan, though young, occasionally wore a thoughtful look, as if he sensed something unspoken simmering beneath these visits. On Tuesday evening, Hannah finished a late shift at the boutique and hurried to meet Jade, who had picked Ethan up from school. When she reached Jade's apartment, she found Ethan sprawled on the floor, crayons scattered, coloring in a handmade sketchbook. Jade offered Hannah a steaming cup of tea, eyebrows raised in question. Hannah slumped on the couch. "He's coming again tomorrow," she told Jade under her breath, glancing to ensure Ethan couldn't overhear. "Matthew, another park meetup." Jade sipped her own tea. "How did Ethan handle the first meeting? Did he suspect anything?" Hannah shook her head. "He thinks Matthew is just some nice grown-up who likes soccer. But Jade, he's getting attached so easily. I'm scared." Jade gave Hannah's arm a reassuring squeeze. "I understand, but you're handling it step by step. That's all you can do." Still, as Hannah gathered Ethan to leave, the fear gnawed at her. She thanked Jade and stepped into the cool night air, the city's distant lights mirroring her own restless anxiety. Ethan chattered happily about a school art project the entire walk home, unaware of her darkening mood. Wednesday came. Hannah arranged a short shift at Lucy's boutique, and by mid-afternoon, she'd managed to pick up Ethan from school herself. They rode the bus to a smaller, quieter park, one with a single swing set and less foot traffic. She wanted to avoid the hustle and prying eyes of the bigger parks downtown. When they arrived, Ethan bounded ahead, scanning the area. Moments later, Matthew approached from across the street, giving a slight wave. Hannah checked her phone reflexively. The meeting time was set for 4 o'clock. She'd told Matthew they had about an hour before they needed to leave for dinner and homework. He'd agreed without question, respecting her boundaries. She appreciated his restraint, though she noted the subtle tension in his posture, as if each moment spent with Ethan was both a gift and a reminder of how much he'd missed. Ethan recognized Matthew instantly, greeting him with an excited, "You came!" and launching into a rapid explanation of how he'd improved his soccer kick technique. Matthew's face lit up with genuine delight. They found a stretch of grass near the old slide, where Matthew and Ethan took turns passing the ball, while Hannah hovered a few feet away on a bench, heart in her throat. She observed them, arms folded. She couldn't deny how well Matthew engaged with Ethan, encouraging him to try new dribbling moves, applauding each successful pass. Occasionally, Matthew would glance back at her, a silent question in his eyes. "Am I doing okay?" She answered with the smallest nod. After about 15 minutes, Ethan declared he was thirsty. Hannah handed him a water bottle from her tote bag. As he drank, Matthew took a step closer to Hannah. "How are you?" he asked softly, keeping an eye on Ethan, who had wandered a few yards away to investigate a squirrel on a tree trunk. "Fine," Hannah replied, Her voice clipped. She caught the flicker of hurt in Matthew's eyes and guilt tugged at her. She softened her tone. I mean, it's a lot, but I'm okay. Matthew nodded, exhaling. I get it. I appreciate you giving me this time. He hesitated, then ventured, Look, I know you don't want any big changes yet, but if you ever need help, childcare, groceries, anything? Hannah's jaw set. No, she said swiftly. Not yet. Let's not complicate this. He dipped his head, accepting her refusal. All right. I respect that. A brief pause followed, heavy with the tension of unspoken truths. Then Ethan ran back, brimming with energy, and the conversation shifted to lighter topics. Hannah let them continue playing until she announced it was time to go. Ethan sighed dramatically, but a small bribe of a snack on the way home perked him up. As they walked out of the park, Ethan insisted on holding Matthew's hand for a moment, the way children sometimes do when they feel safe. The sight jolted Hannah's heart. Ethan's hand, so small in Matthew's. Matthew looked down at him with an expression bordering on wonder. When they reached the bus stop, Ethan hopped onto the curb, bounding up and down. Hannah braced herself, waiting to see if Matthew would push for more time. Instead, he simply smiled at Ethan, then said, Have a good evening, buddy. You too, Ethan chirped, stepping onto the bus with Hannah. The door hissed shut, and again Hannah watched Matthew recede from view through the window. Her emotions churned so intensely she had to close her eyes for a moment, inhaling slowly as the bus rumbled away. That night she tried to distract herself by tidying the apartment, but it wasn't enough to quiet her thoughts. When her phone buzzed, she almost didn't check it, fearing it was Matthew. But the curiosity won out. To her relief, it was Jade, sending a silly meme. Hannah let out a breath and typed a quick reply, letting her friend's joke lighten her mood. Ethan was in the living room, drawing again. Since he'd returned from the park, he seemed more animated, more talkative about the cool friend who'd shown him new moves. Hannah forced a smile whenever he mentioned it. She wanted to preserve Ethan's happiness, but her mind kept looping. How long until I tell him? Will he hate me for hiding it? Could Matthew truly stick around for the long haul? When Ethan asked if the friend could come for dinner someday, Hannah deflected, We'll see, sweetheart. Sometime, maybe. She felt cruel for the half-truth, but she couldn't risk a slip that would reveal Matthew's full identity until she was sure. She couldn't handle the thought of Ethan attaching the word dad to someone who might vanish if life got too complicated. In the days that followed, Matthew and Hannah texted more frequently, short, polite messages about scheduling. She allowed a third meetup in the park the following week. This time, Jade was busy, so Hannah brought her friend's teenage cousin, Tori, who sometimes babysat, to keep an eye on Ethan if Hannah needed a break. Tori hovered discreetly, giving Hannah enough space to speak with Matthew alone. They ended up sitting on a battered wooden bench while Ethan and Tori chased each other across the field. Hannah took a slow breath. He's gotten so fond of you, she murmured, voice tinged with conflict. Part of me is glad and part of me is terrified. Matthew looked pained. Terrified I'll leave, or that I'll hurt him somehow? Her throat worked. Both. Everything. My entire job has been to protect him from disappointment or heartbreak. I can't let him down. Matthew's hand curled around the edge of the bench. I don't want to let him down either. I know I can't erase 6 years, but I'm trying to show I'm serious. I'm changing my schedule, cutting back on travel. I want to be here. His voice wavered. For both of you. Hannah stared at a cluster of pigeons pecking at the grass, her mind swirling. She believed he was sincere, but sincerity could wither under stress. She recalled all the corporate demands on Matthew's time, the endless parade of deals that once overshadowed everything else. Could he truly change? Or would fatherhood become just another checkbox on his list of accomplishments? Finally, she asked, What does your company's board think about you scaling back? He winced slightly. I haven't told them all the details. I just said I have personal commitments. But the CFO is noticing. Some investors raised eyebrows. He paused, glancing sideways at Hannah. I don't care. This is bigger than any business deal. She felt a mixture of relief and renewed anxiety. If he was making real sacrifices, that suggested genuine intent. But it also meant he was stirring the hornet's nest of corporate politics. A CEO suddenly shifting priorities could trigger rumors, or worse. She decided to store that worry away for another time. Ethan asked if you could come over for dinner soon, she admitted in a tight whisper, eyes never leaving the pigeons. I told him maybe, but I'm not sure that's the best idea. Matthew's chest rose with a hopeful breath. I'd be honored, but only if you're comfortable. She forced a short laugh. Comfortable might be an overstatement, but I want to do what's right for Ethan. Let me think on it. They let the topic rest. Across the field, Ethan whooped, turning cartwheels in the grass while Tori clapped. For a moment, Hannah and Matthew shared a silent, tender glance, acknowledging how special Ethan was, and what it meant to stand here, side by side, quietly shaping his future. That weekend, Hannah bit the bullet and invited Matthew over for a modest dinner on Sunday evening. She emphasized that it was a simple meal, nothing extravagant, and specifically requested he bring no gifts. He agreed without protest. On Sunday morning, Hannah busied herself cleaning the apartment, feeling a bit self-conscious about its worn furniture and peeling paint. She constantly reminded herself that she didn't owe Matthew any illusions of prosperity. He should see the reality she lived with, the life Ethan grew up in, hand-me-downs, scuffed floors, second-hand textbooks. This was their truth. Ethan, of course, was thrilled, bouncing around the living room with excitement about the soccer buddy who would come over. He asked if they could make cookies together. Hannah hesitated. Money was tight, but she found a half-used bag of flour and some chocolate chips. Why not? It might keep Ethan occupied and calm her own nerves. By 5:30, the apartment smelled of freshly baked cookies. Ethan was busily arranging them on a plate when a soft knock sounded at the door. Hannah's stomach flipped. He's here. She opened the door. Matthew stood in the hallway carrying only a polite smile. No massive gift bags, no lavish gestures. He wore a simple sweater and jeans. Somehow that made Hannah breathe a little easier. Thank you for having me, he said, stepping inside. His gaze swept the modest living area, the dated paint job, and the small kitchenette. No judgment flickered in his eyes, only a quiet acceptance. Ethan dashed over, practically vibrating with excitement. I made cookies, he announced, dragging Matthew toward the kitchen. You have to try one. Matthew laughed, following the boy willingly. Hannah hovered near the doorway, carefully observing. She'd worried that seeing her apartment, her financial struggles, might unnerve him or provoke an awkward attempt at offering money. But he didn't mention any of it. He simply bent down to admire Ethan's cookie display and gamely took a bite, proclaiming it delicious despite the fact it was a bit overcooked. For dinner, Hannah had prepared a simple pasta dish with garlic bread. The three of them squeezed around her small dining table, a second-hand piece she'd found years ago. Conversation flowed easily at first. Ethan chattering about a new friend at school, Matthew responding with genuine curiosity. Hannah interjected occasionally, giving gentle reminders, chew with your mouth closed or don't talk over each other. Underneath the surface, she was on high alert. Every time Ethan said something that hinted at fatherly territory, like, Mom says I learned to walk earlier than normal, or Mom says I look like her side of the family, she'd glance at Matthew's face, gauging his reaction. Each time, a flicker of regret passed through his eyes, but he kept smiling, nodding, focusing on Ethan's words. By the time they finished the meal, Ethan was yawning, bedtime approaching. Hannah watched him rub his eyes and fight to stay awake so he could keep chatting with his new favorite adult. It tugged at her heart. She knew she had to wind things down before the boy got overtired. All right, buddy, she said gently. Time to start winding down. Remember you have school tomorrow. Ethan pouted briefly, then hopped up from his chair. Can we finish the cookies later? Matthew chuckled. Of course, I'll be around. The moment he said it, his face grew solemn, as if worried he'd promised too much. Then he turned to Hannah. Thank you for dinner, he said softly, sincerity evident in every syllable. Sure. She folded her arms, standing in the cramped kitchen. I'll walk you to the door. They made their way to the front hallway, leaving Ethan in the living room to tidy his crayons. At the threshold, Matthew paused. He seemed to struggle for words. Finally, he said, That was wonderful. More than I deserve. Hannah's throat tightened. She was about to respond when Matthew reached into his pocket and produced a small envelope. Her eyes narrowed in suspicion. Please don't get angry, he said quickly. This isn't about me flashing money around. It's just some grocery gift cards. I know things can be tight and He halted, seeing her stiffen. I swear I'm not trying to insult you. I just want to help, even in a small way. Hannah's instinct was to refuse immediately, the pride in her chest sparking. But something in Matthew's expression, mingled with the memory of scrimping for cookie ingredients, made her hesitate. He was offering this quietly, respectfully, not expecting applause. Slowly, she took the envelope, hands trembling. I'll consider it, she said in a half-whisper, swallowing her discomfort. Matthew exhaled, relief evident. Thank you, and thank you for letting me be part of his evening. It means everything. She gave a faint nod, opening the door. He stepped out into the dim hallway. After a last glance over his shoulder, he offered a gentle, grateful smile. Then the door shut, leaving Hannah alone with her thoughts. She locked it, pressing her forehead against the wood. A small voice from the living room. Mom? Is he gone? She inhaled, forcing calm. Yeah, baby, he's gone. Come on, let's get you in pajamas. As she guided Ethan toward bedtime, her mind whirled with questions. Accepting help from Matthew felt like stepping onto shaky ground, but rejecting him outright felt just as wrong. She looked at Ethan, whose eyes still sparkled from the excitement of having a new adult friend. How many more dinners could they share before the truth had to come out? While Ethan brushed his teeth, Hannah peeked at the envelope. Just a few small gift cards, no amount that screamed condescension, only enough to cover a few weeks of groceries. Setting it aside, she made a mental note. If I use them, I'll keep track of everything. She didn't want to feel beholden, but refusing might only make life harder for Ethan. That night, after Ethan was asleep, Hannah hovered by the window, gazing at the distant glow of streetlights. For the first time, she allowed a tiny, fragile bud of hope to bloom in her chest. Perhaps this precarious new arrangement could be nurtured into something stable, something Ethan could rely on. The future was still uncertain, but at least, for this moment, the man she once thought too distant to care was showing up for their son. Quietly, consistently. She prayed it would be enough. The next few days fell into an uneasy rhythm, as if the universe had struck a fragile truce. Hannah and Matthew navigated their new arrangement with delicate care. He texted once a day, sometimes just a brief greeting or a query about Ethan's school project. Hannah replied, but always succinctly. Trust was still under construction, each message laying a tentative plank across the gulf of 6 lost years. Ethan, for his part, had never been happier or more curious. His mother could see how he buzzed with excitement whenever they planned another meetup or the possibility of Matthew coming by for a casual snack. Yet the boy also started asking more pointed questions when Matthew wasn't around. Mom, how long have you known him? Did he know me when I was a baby? Why does he look at me like he knows me really well? Each inquiry sliced through Hannah with the force of a scalpel. She invented half-truths. We lost touch for a while, or he's getting to know you better now. She promised herself that soon, very soon, she'd find the right words to confess everything. But fear still held her captive. Until she was certain Matthew wouldn't walk away, she couldn't bear to reveal the secret that would forever change Ethan's sense of who he was. One evening, Jade popped by with her typical bright energy, carrying a Tupperware of leftover pasta. Ethan was already asleep. It was a school night, and Hannah had just finished tidying up the kitchen. Jade set the container on the counter and leaned against the fridge, eyes scanning Hannah's tense face. "So," Jade prompted, "how's the new friend situation going?" Hannah sank into a chair at the small kitchen table. "Ethan adores him. They play soccer or talk about everything from superheroes to outer space. It's so natural, it scares me." "Scares you how?" Hannah pursed her lips. "Because if it goes wrong, if Matthew decides fatherhood isn't for him, Ethan will be crushed. And I'd be the one picking up the pieces." Jade reached over to squeeze her friend's hand. "That's a valid worry," she acknowledged. "But from what you've said, Matthew's been stepping up. Maybe you should give yourself permission to believe in that." Hannah managed a half smile. "I'm trying. It's just new territory. I'm also behind on rent and everything feels precarious." Jade nodded sympathetically. "Well, if that grocery gift card helps, use it. Don't let your pride overshadow what's best for Ethan. And remember, I'm here if you need anything." Hannah squeezed Jade's hand in return, feeling a wash of gratitude for a friend who'd been her rock through countless hardships. The conversation shifted to lighter topics: work, gossip, a funny story from the hospital. For a moment, Hannah's shoulders eased. Meanwhile, across town, Matthew was dealing with his own storm. In a sleek conference room 30 floors above the city, he sat across from his CFO and 2 board members. Papers littered the table: recent quarterly reports, potential acquisition proposals, a summary of upcoming investor calls. The board members eyed him suspiciously, noticing how his legendary laser focus seemed off. "Matthew," one of them ventured, "this is a pivotal period. We can't afford distractions. Is something going on we should know about?" Matthew cleared his throat, forcing composure. "Nothing that affects the company. I've been keeping up with all urgent tasks." The CFO frowned, flipping through a folder. "We've tried scheduling calls with you on several afternoons, but your assistant says you're unavailable. You used to work evenings, weekends. Now you seem to be stepping back." Her tone was carefully neutral, but unmistakably concerned. He steeled himself. "I'm dealing with a family matter," he admitted, voice taut. "It doesn't impede my responsibilities here. I promise the company remains my priority." One board member raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Family matter? We weren't aware you had family in the city." Matthew exhaled. "It's complicated," he said, opting for minimal detail. "But rest assured it won't jeopardize our bottom line or any acquisitions on the horizon. My new schedule is a small adjustment, not a permanent overhaul." The board members exchanged glances. After a tense pause, they moved on to the next agenda item. But Matthew felt their wariness settle like a silent weight in the room. He realized this balancing act, fatherhood, corporate leadership, bridging the gap with Hannah, would be more precarious than he'd imagined. Yet as he left the meeting, he clenched his fists with renewed resolve. He couldn't let the board or anyone else deter him from what truly mattered now. Ethan was more important than any business deal. A week later, Hannah agreed to a casual outing in a different setting. Instead of a park, she suggested a small, family-friendly cafe near her neighborhood for an after-school treat. Ethan practically glowed with excitement when he realized the friend would be joining them. She gave him strict instructions to keep it short because he had homework. And to Matthew, she was even more firm in her guidelines. No expensive surprises, just normal conversation over ice cream or juice. They arrived at the cafe around 4. Ethan raced to the dessert counter, mesmerized by the flavors of gelato. Hannah followed, scanning the patrons for Matthew. She spotted him seated in a corner booth, discreetly checking his phone. The moment he saw them, he pocketed the device and stood smiling. Ethan grabbed Hannah's hand, towing her forward. "He's here, Mom!" the boy announced, as if she hadn't already noticed. "Yes, I see," Hannah replied, lips curving in a wary smile. She led Ethan to the booth, letting him slide in next to Matthew while she took the seat opposite. The small table forced them close, knees bumping. Hannah's pulse fluttered at the intimacy of this simple scene. A mother, a child, and a father, unsuspectingly sharing space, only one of them still in the dark about their actual roles. A cheerful server approached, taking orders. Matthew asked for a plain black coffee. Hannah requested tea. Ethan, eyes sparkling, chose a vanilla milkshake with extra whipped cream. As the server left, Matthew turned to the boy. "So, I hear you have a school project on space?" Ethan nodded vigorously. "Yeah, we're learning about the solar system. We made a model with styrofoam planets. Mom helped me paint them. She's super good at painting." Hannah found herself blushing slightly. It wasn't often she was praised for her modest artistic hobby. Matthew caught her eye, smiling. "That's great," he said to Ethan. "Your mom is talented." She shrugged, fiddling with a napkin. "I just do what I can." The milkshake arrived, topped with a mountain of whipped cream and a bright cherry. Ethan cheered. Hannah sipped her tea, ignoring the curious glance from a couple at a neighboring table. Maybe they assumed she and Matthew were a normal family. The thought both warmed and chilled her. "How's school otherwise?" Matthew asked Ethan. "Any favorite subjects besides space?" "Art!" the boy exclaimed. "I love drawing. Sometimes I draw soccer players with superhero capes." He laughed, slurping his shake. Drops of whipped cream landed on his nose, making him giggle harder. Matthew chuckled, dabbing Ethan's nose with a napkin. The casual tenderness of the act made Hannah's throat tighten. She wondered if Matthew realized how paternal he looked in that moment, like someone who'd done it 100 times before, wiping away his child's mess. But in reality, it was brand new, a role he was assuming with surprising ease. They chatted about everyday things: Ethan's teacher, the next big soccer match at school, the costumed parade the neighborhood planned for Halloween. Hannah contributed sparingly, letting Matthew and Ethan bond in a natural flow. After half an hour, she glanced at the clock on her phone. "We should head home soon," she said gently. "Homework time." Ethan's face fell. "But," Hannah shook her head. "We agreed, remember? You've got spelling words to practice." Matthew offered a sympathetic smile. "We can do this again, right?" Ethan's eyes lit up. "Yes, soon." Hannah nodded, though she kept her expression carefully neutral. "We'll work out another time," she affirmed, standing up. The server brought the bill, and Matthew instinctively reached for it. A wave of unease rippled through Hannah, but she forced herself to let him pay. They were in public, after all, and she could read the subtle note in his eyes. He wanted to provide something, even just the cost of a milkshake. She relented. "Thank you," she said quietly. He nodded, dropping cash on the tray. Then, as they left the cafe, he walked them to the bus stop. The chill of early autumn crept into the air, rustling leaves along the sidewalk. Ethan was still chattering about the milkshake, oblivious to the tension thrumming between the adults. "So," Matthew said, voice hushed as the bus neared, "any chance I could see him this weekend? Maybe do something fun, like a museum or a short trip to the aquarium?" Hannah hesitated, biting her lip. She knew Ethan would love that, but her instincts screamed caution. A bus trip to the aquarium might raise questions about why Matthew was so invested in Ethan's life. She decided to set a small boundary. "How about we keep it local again? Maybe a museum in the city, just for a couple hours." Matthew's shoulders relaxed. "That'd be great. I appreciate any time you'll allow. Text me when you figure out a good day." The bus pulled up, doors opening with a pneumatic hiss. Ethan scurried on first, calling over his shoulder, "Bye, see you soon." Hannah followed, pausing at the top step to exchange a final look with Matthew. In his eyes, She read gratitude, yearning, and a flicker of hope. She offered him a slight nod, then the doors clamped shut. As the bus rumbled away, Hannah settled beside Ethan. Part of her felt lighter, seeing how these brief encounters filled her son with joy. But the dread lingered. The longer she withheld the truth, the bigger the shock to Ethan's world when it finally came out. That night, after homework and bedtime rituals, Hannah found herself alone in the quiet apartment. She answered a few texts from Lucy about upcoming work shifts, folded laundry, and then sank onto the sofa. Her phone buzzed. Matthew again, a brief message. Matthew, 8:15 p.m. Thank you for tonight. He's amazing. Hope I can keep seeing him happy like that. Her breath caught. For once, she typed more than a few words back. Hannah, 8:18 p.m. I see you're trying. He's never had someone other than me take such an interest. Just be careful. He's trusting and doesn't know the whole picture. I'm still protecting him. The reply came quickly. Matthew, 8:20 p.m. I understand. I'll wait for you to decide how and when to tell him. I won't push. Just know I want to be there for both of you. Hannah's eyes stung. She set the phone aside, burying her face in her hands. She'd wanted to keep every aspect of this arrangement under tight control, to ensure Ethan never got hurt. But with each passing day, father and son grew closer, and her own walls felt shakier. Sooner or later, she'd have to open the final door, revealing that the man Ethan admired was not just a friend, but the father he'd longed for without even knowing. Quiet tears slipped down her cheeks, fueled by both fear and an odd, fragile sense of relief. A single question pulsed in her mind, unanswerable in that moment. When the truth spilled out, would it be a step toward healing, or the beginning of new heartbreak? Tomorrow, she told herself, or maybe the day after. She would find the strength to speak the words that would change their family forever. But for now, she wiped her eyes, closed them, and waited for sleep to soothe the turmoil inside her soul. Hannah woke Friday morning to a swirl of anxiety. That day after work, Matthew planned to take Ethan to a children's museum. Just a few hours, local, low-key. She'd insisted on an outing within city limits, and with Jade's schedule free, they'd agreed Jade would tag along. Hannah felt safer with an extra adult present, even though part of her still bristled at the idea of letting Ethan go off without her. But the boy's excited grin had been impossible to deny. Before Ethan left for school, Hannah triple-checked that he knew Jade was in charge. Listen to everything Jade says, okay? She reminded him, tying his sneakers. Stay with her and don't wander off. Ethan rolled his eyes in that innocent, exasperated way kids do. Mom, I know. I'm not a baby. She mussed his hair, forcing a smile. Right, just be careful, and have fun. He gave her a quick hug, then bounded out the door. The moment it closed, the apartment felt emptier. Hannah sighed, glancing around her cramped living room. Too many restless thoughts crowded in. What if they get stuck in traffic? What if Ethan asks Matthew a question she hasn't prepared for? What if Jade can't distract him at the right moment? Snatching her purse, Hannah headed off for an early shift at Lucy's boutique. She needed to keep busy. By mid-afternoon, her nerves had settled a bit thanks to the monotony of folding sweaters and assisting customers with scattered weekend shopping. At 3 o'clock, Lucy approached with an apologetic look. We'll close in 2 hours, she said. But I just got a call. My sister's in the hospital. I might need to leave earlier. Can you handle lockup if that happens? Sure, Hannah replied, eyes flicking to the clock. Jade and Ethan would be meeting Matthew around 4:30. She'd hoped to be free by then, but it looked like she might be stuck until Lucy returned. Another wave of anxiety rippled through her. By 4:15, Lucy had already rushed out, leaving Hannah with keys to lock up after finishing a last bit of inventory. The store was mostly empty. One customer wandered the aisles, but eventually left without buying anything. Alone, Hannah tapped her foot nervously, phone in hand, half expecting a text from Jade or Matthew. Nothing. She stared at the display racks, mentally replaying the arrangement. Jade would meet Matthew near the subway. They'd take Ethan to the museum, and Hannah would join them if she finished in time. But time crawled, and Lucy didn't return. At 4:45, Hannah couldn't wait any longer. She typed a quick message to Jade. "Hannah, 4:45 p.m., stuck at the boutique. Let me know how it goes, please." She prayed Jade would see it soon. Minutes later, Jade replied, "Jade, 4:47 p.m. All good. Met up with Matthew. We're on the way. Ethan's excited. Promised to keep you posted." Hannah exhaled, chest tightening with a mix of relief and envy. She should be there. She should be the one watching over Ethan. And yet, she'd told herself she needed to loosen the reins a bit, to let Matthew prove he was capable in her absence. Some part of her felt like she was failing her son by not being present for this milestone. Another part whispered that maybe this was necessary if she ever wanted to truly share parenthood. Finally, at 5:15, Lucy dashed back into the store, apologizing profusely. Her hair disheveled, she thanked Hannah for staying late. "Sorry, family emergency," she murmured. "They said it's not as serious as we feared, but I had to be sure." "Don't worry about it," Hannah said, already grabbing her jacket. "I hope things get better for your sister." Lucy nodded, still flustered. "Go on, you're free. I can handle closing." Hannah barely managed a goodbye before rushing onto the sidewalk. She speed-walked to the nearest bus stop, checking the museum's closing time on her phone. It was open until 7. Maybe she could still catch them in time to see Ethan's reaction to the exhibits. Her foot tapped nervously as the bus lumbered through traffic, each red light an eternity. At the Children's Museum, Jade hovered near the entrance, scanning a brochure while Ethan and Matthew explored the exhibits. She saw Hannah rushing up the front steps, face flushed from half-jogging the last few blocks. Jade waved in greeting. "How is it?" Hannah asked, breathless. Jade grinned. "They're fine. Ethan's in heaven. There's a hands-on science corner he's obsessed with. Matthew's been super attentive. No weirdness or pushiness." Relief flooded Hannah's features. "Good. Where are they now?" "Second floor, I think. Some dinosaur skeleton display." Jade checked her watch. "I was just about to text you. Want me to show you?" Hannah nodded, letting Jade lead her through the museum's bright, winding corridors. Families milled around, children squealing with delight at interactive stations. They climbed the stairs, eventually spotting Matthew and Ethan at a large exhibit featuring a partial T-Rex skeleton and educational videos playing on loops. Hannah paused at a corner, watching them from a small distance. Ethan was perched on a stool, pressing buttons on a console that highlighted different dinosaur bones, while Matthew read out loud from a placard. The boy hung on his every word, occasionally laughing when Matthew stumbled over long dinosaur names. Something about the scene squeezed Hannah's heart. A vision of a father teaching a child. A normal, everyday moment that felt so far from the reality they'd lived until recently. Matthew noticed her first, glancing away from the placard and meeting her gaze. A warm smile spread across his face. He waved her over. "Hey," he said softly, stepping closer, conscious of the crowd. "We were just learning about the Jurassic period. Did you know T-Rex lived in the Cretaceous period, not the Jurassic?" Hannah mustered a tiny grin, stepping beside him as Ethan twisted around on his stool. "Mom, you made it!" the boy exclaimed, practically bouncing off his seat. "Look, I can make the dinosaur bones light up by pressing these buttons. It's so cool!" "That's awesome, sweetheart," Hannah replied, her anxiety ebbing at the sight of her son's joy. She gave Jade a quick nod of thanks for managing the outing so well. They strolled through the exhibit, reading fun facts and letting Ethan lead the way. He raced to a display of fossils, then to a life-sized animatronic dinosaur that roared on a timer. Matthew followed, listening intently to Ethan's excited chatter. Occasionally, Hannah caught Jade's eye. Her friend arched a brow in silent approval, as if to say, "This is going well." After about half an hour, they entered a quieter room dedicated to prehistoric marine life. Soft lighting and large glass panels displayed recreated ocean scenes. Ethan pressed his nose to a panel, enthralled by the models of ancient sharks. Jade, noticing a nearby vending machine, excused herself to grab a drink. Hannah and Matthew lingered behind, letting Ethan roam around a bit. Matthew lowered his voice. He's had a blast. No meltdown, no trouble. It feels so natural. His eyes shone with a touch of awe, as if he still couldn't believe this was his life now. Hannah nodded, her own heart brimming with conflicting emotions. "I'm glad," she murmured. She folded her arms, glancing at Ethan. "Thank you for keeping an eye on him. And for involving Jade. It was smart to have an extra adult there." He gave a small shrug, as if it were obvious. "I respect your conditions. I never want you to feel uneasy." She turned to face him, noting the sincerity etched in his features. A question hovered on her lips, unspoken. "Are you really prepared for all this? Forever?" Instead, she said, "He's growing attached to you. Every day he talks about things he wants to show you or teach you. It's wonderful, but—" She trailed off, her voice trembling slightly. Matthew finished the sentence in his own way. "But if I fail him, it'll crush him. I know." He inhaled shakily. "Hannah, you can't imagine how determined I am not to fail. This is the most important thing I've ever done." Tension coiled in her chest, both relief and trepidation. She glanced around, ensuring Ethan was still engrossed with the exhibits. "We're at a crossroads," she admitted. "I can't keep him in the dark forever. He needs to know you're his father before someone else accidentally reveals it, or before he pieces it together himself." Matthew looked startled, though not displeased. "You're ready to tell him?" "I don't know if I'll ever be fully ready," Hannah confessed, forcing a thin smile. "But it's time. Maybe soon. In a controlled, gentle way." His eyes flickered with gratitude. "Whenever you decide, I'll follow your lead. If you want me there, or if you want to tell him first alone, whatever you think is best for him." A beat passed. The hush of the marine life room felt heavy with significance. They locked eyes, and for the first time Hannah felt a subdued sense of alliance, both of them wanting to protect Ethan. She exhaled softly. "I need a couple of days to figure out how to handle it. Then, we'll do this." Before Matthew could reply, Ethan ran up, waving a small brochure. "Mom, can we go see the volcano exhibit? They have a pretend lava flow." The child's eyes sparkled, oblivious to the adult conversation swirling just beneath the surface. Hannah mustered an enthusiastic nod. "Sure, let's go." She motioned to Jade, who had returned with a water bottle, and the group migrated to the next section, letting the momentum of Ethan's excitement carry them forward. They left the museum close to closing time. Outside, twilight bathed the street in purple-blue light. Jade said her goodbyes, needing to catch a train, so Hannah and Ethan were left with Matthew for a brief moment on the sidewalk. Hannah hailed a taxi, which pulled up to the curb in a swirl of headlights and city noise. Ethan still buzzed with leftover museum excitement, hugging the little souvenir map. "This was the best day ever," he declared, giving Matthew an impulsive high five. Then he slid into the back seat with Hannah. She buckled him in, turning to Matthew, who lingered at the open taxi door. "Thank you," she said, voice low enough that Ethan wouldn't overhear. "For respecting the boundaries." Matthew nodded, stepping back onto the sidewalk. "Text me when you're ready. I'll be here." She shut the door, and as the taxi pulled away, Ethan eagerly recounted every dinosaur detail for the driver, who chuckled and played along. Hannah half listened, but her mind replayed the conversation with Matthew, the vow she'd made. In a few days, she'd finally tell Ethan the truth. Her nerves spiked. This secret had been the bedrock of her life for 6 years, protecting her child from the heartbreak she'd once experienced. Now, the time had come to let the truth out, trusting that Matthew wouldn't shatter Ethan's world. Clutching her purse, she gazed out the taxi window at the passing lights, bracing herself for the inevitable upheaval. She whispered a silent prayer. May they all be strong enough to face whatever came next. Sunday arrived with a hush in the air, as though the world knew what was coming. Hannah had spent the entire previous night wrestling with how best to tell Ethan about his father. She'd mapped out possible conversations in her head, each scenario leading to a swirl of emotions: relief, confusion, anger, hope. Whenever she closed her eyes, she imagined Ethan's face, his reaction, and the words stuck in her throat. By morning, she'd decided the time was now. No more delays or excuses. Matthew had offered to let her handle it alone if that was her preference. After much thought, she agreed it might be gentler for Ethan if the news came from her first, in the privacy of their home, where she could offer comfort if he got upset. Then, once he'd had a moment to process, Matthew could arrive, ready to answer Ethan's questions or simply be there, however Ethan chose. She texted Matthew, Hannah, 8:10 a.m. I'm telling him today, let's say, around noon? You can come by after, around 1? His reply was immediate. Matthew, 8:12 a.m. Okay, I'll be there. Thank you for trusting me. And him. Her stomach lurched. She tucked the phone away, trying to steady her breathing. Outside, the autumn sun glowed through the thin curtains of their living room. She heard Ethan humming off-key in the kitchen, fiddling with his cereal. She swallowed hard. This was the last morning he'd be able to believe Matthew was just a friendly stranger. Mom? Ethan's call startled her. Can I go outside after breakfast? Jade said there's a street fair. Hannah forced a gentle tone. Maybe later, sweetie. First, we need to talk. He emerged from the kitchen, spoon in hand, blinking curiously. About what? She gestured for him to join her on the sofa. The small living room suddenly felt even smaller. Ethan plopped down beside her, setting his spoon on the coffee table. She noted the drip of milk sliding down its handle and forced herself not to fixate on trivial things. Focus, she told herself. Ethan, she began, heart thudding. I need to tell you something important. Remember that friend you've been hanging out with recently? Matthew? Ethan's eyes lit up. Yeah, he's so fun. Are we going somewhere with him today? Hannah took a slow breath. In a way, yes. But first, you deserve to know the truth. She reached for his hand, feeling how small it was compared to hers. You know how sometimes families aren't always just moms and kids, right? Sometimes there's a dad or grandparents or other people who care about you. He tilted his head, frowning slightly. Yeah, like my friend John has a mom and a dad. Hannah nodded, throat tightening. Exactly. Well, when you were born, it wasn't just me involved. You have a dad too, it's just that you've never known him. Until now. Ethan's eyes widened, flickering with confusion and curiosity. I have a dad. Why didn't I ever see him before? His voice quivered with surprise rather than anger. Yet. Hannah swallowed the lump in her throat. Because we were living separate lives. Things were complicated back then. But he's the man you've been spending time with, Ethan. Matthew is your father. For a moment, the world seemed to stand still. Hannah could practically hear her own heartbeat. Ethan sat very still, brows knitting together as he processed. She braced herself for tears or shouting, but his reaction was quieter. That man is my dad, he said, voice hushed. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Hannah felt tears well in her eyes. She squeezed his hand gently. I was scared, she admitted. I didn't want you to be hurt if things didn't work out. But I realized hiding it any longer would be unfair to you. You deserve the truth. He stared down at his knees, lips pressed tight. A minute passed, long enough that Hannah's heart pounded in her ears. Then he looked up, searching her face. Does he know he's my dad? She managed a watery smile. Yes. He only found out recently, but he's been trying very hard to show that he wants to be part of your life. Ethan blinked, tears gathering in his own eyes. He whispered, I thought maybe he was just your boyfriend or something. But he's my dad? He let that sink in, then asked, Is he nice because he has to be? Or does he really like me? Hannah's breath caught. She wrapped an arm around his shoulders, gently pulling him close. He likes you a lot, Ethan. I promise. He's been so happy getting to know you. He's nervous too because he missed out on so much time. But he really wants to be here for you. The boy sniffled, letting a tear slip down his cheek. So he's not gonna leave again, right? People say dads should be around. His voice quivered with the fear Hannah had desperately tried to shield him from. I hope not, Hannah murmured, her own tears escaping. He says he won't. He wants to be in your life for good, and I'm going to make sure he keeps that promise. Ethan pressed his face into her shoulder. They sat like that, mother and son, embracing in the small living room where they'd weathered every hardship alone. Hannah's tears soaked into his hair as she whispered words of reassurance. Eventually, Ethan pulled back, eyes red. I kinda always wondered, he admitted shakily. I saw other kids with their dads. I thought maybe I just didn't get one. He gave a half laugh, half sob. He's my dad? Whoa! Hannah nodded, wiping his cheeks with her thumbs. Yeah, whoa, she echoed softly. It's a big change, I know, and it's okay to feel lots of different emotions. Happy, mad, confused. You can tell me all of it. He sniffed again, then grabbed a tissue from the coffee table. Does he want me to call him Dad? Hannah hesitated. That's up to you. If you feel comfortable, you can talk about it with him. I'm sure he'd be overjoyed, but he'll understand if you need time. Ethan exhaled shakily, glancing around the living room as if seeing it anew. So, is he coming here? Today? She cleared her throat. Yes, around 1. I asked him to wait until we had a chance to talk first, so you could decide if you want to see him. A flicker of warmth returned to Ethan's eyes. I do want to see him. I have questions. Hannah's chest loosened a fraction. Okay then. He'll be here soon. We can talk, or we can watch a movie together. Whatever you need. Ethan nodded. Can he see my drawings? I made a new one of a T-Rex. Relief and love flooded Hannah. She managed a wobbly smile. I'm sure he'd love that. They spent the next hour in a strange haze of tension and anticipation. Ethan, jittery with emotion, tried to distract himself by organizing his crayons, occasionally eyeing the clock. Hannah tidied the already tidy living room, removing clutter, adjusting cushions, checking her phone obsessively for any message from Matthew. At exactly 1:03 p.m., a soft knock sounded at the door. Ethan jumped, eyes wide, then looked at Hannah. She placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, took a breath, and opened the door. Matthew stood there wearing a collared shirt and an expression so unsure it made him appear younger. His gaze darted between Hannah and Ethan, searching for cues. Hannah gave him a small nod, stepping aside. He entered, gently shutting the door behind him. Hey, he managed, voice subdued. Then, looking at Ethan, so, I guess you know now. I'm your dad. Ethan stared for a beat, clutching the edges of his t-shirt. Yeah, he said, voice trembling. Mom told me. Matthew swallowed. I'm sorry you had to wait so long to find out, he said, every word laden with regret, but I'm really happy to be here now. The boy's eyes flicked to Hannah, then back to Matthew. Are you gonna leave? He asked bluntly. Like, later, when work gets busy? Matthew's face tightened with raw emotion. I promise I'm not leaving, he said, voice thick. Work is just work. You're your family. I'm here to stay if you'll have me. Ethan's lip trembled again, but he stepped closer. Matthew lowered himself to one knee, a gesture that put him at Ethan's eye level. Slowly, Ethan reached out and touched Matthew's shoulder, as if testing solidity. Then, in a sudden burst, he threw his arms around Matthew's neck. Matthew let out a shaky breath, hugging Ethan gently in return. Hannah pressed a hand to her mouth, tears burning at the edges of her eyes. This was the moment she'd feared, yet also longed for. Her child finding the father he never knew he had. For several seconds, They just held each other. Finally, Ethan pulled back, wiping his nose on his sleeve. Hannah grabbed a tissue box, pressing it into the boy's hand. Matthew stood, eyes damp, and offered a watery smile to Hannah. "Thank you," he mouthed. She nodded, breathless. Ethan, still emotional, clung to Matthew's arm. "Want to see my dinosaur drawings?" he asked in a small, hopeful voice. Matthew nodded, voice unsteady. "I'd love to." Hannah led them to the living room table where Ethan's sketches lay in neat stacks. The boy chattered about dinosaur facts while Matthew listened intently, occasionally glancing at Hannah with a mix of amazement and gratitude. She hovered, heart pounding, letting them forge this connection without interruption. After a while, she stepped into the kitchen to give them space, busying herself making tea. She could hear Ethan asking questions about why Matthew wasn't around before, and Matthew, to his credit, giving gentle, truthful answers. That he didn't know, that he'd made mistakes, that he was so sorry, and that he would do everything in his power to make up for lost time. Ethan's voice quavered here and there, but he didn't retreat or lash out. His curiosity overrode any immediate anger. Hannah returned with mugs of tea, offering a quiet smile. The three of them sipped together, an odd little family in a cramped apartment, no longer hiding secrets behind polite half-truths. The tension of the day lifted, replaced by a fragile hope that maybe they could piece together something real, something that felt like home. Eventually, Matthew gently suggested going out for a short walk or grabbing a snack if Ethan felt up to it. But the boy seemed content just being here, in his own environment, showing Matthew his art and stuffed animals. At one point, Ethan impulsively called Matthew Dad, then froze, as if startled by his own word choice. Matthew's eyes shone, and he murmured, "I love hearing that, but only if you're comfortable." Ethan shyly nodded, cheeks pink. Hannah watched, tears threatening again, marveling at how quickly a single word could reshape their universe. By evening, Matthew reluctantly said he should let them have some rest. Ethan tried to hide his disappointment, but Hannah insisted it was important to take it slowly. They arranged another visit for the following afternoon, a chance to continue talking, maybe play soccer, maybe just be together. The plan felt simultaneously fragile and essential, like a newly planted seed. As Matthew left, Ethan walked him to the door. The boy stared at Matthew's face, as though memorizing every feature. "You promise you'll come back tomorrow, right?" he asked. Matthew knelt again, pressing his hand to Ethan's small shoulder. "I promise," he said, voice steady. "I'll be here, and I'll keep coming back every chance I get." Ethan nodded, swallowing hard. "Okay," he whispered. Then he stepped back, allowing Matthew to stand. The door clicked shut, leaving mother and son alone in the quiet. Hannah turned to Ethan, scanning his expression. "How are you feeling?" He didn't answer right away, eyes brimming with emotion. Then, to her surprise, he hugged her tight. "I'm happy," he whispered into her shirt. "And kinda sad and scared, but mostly happy." Hannah stroked his hair, tears slipping free again. "It's okay to feel all of that," she murmured, voice shaking. "I do too." They sank onto the sofa, holding each other. Outside, the sun dipped low, painting the apartment in warm, golden light. For once, Hannah didn't mind the peeling paint or the worn carpet. This moment was theirs, tangled in raw truth and new beginnings. She knew challenges lay ahead. Matthew would have to juggle his corporate world, the board's demands, and the messy realities of parenthood. She and Matthew still had to bridge their own broken past. But for now, in the hush of early evening, Ethan's small hand curled in hers, and she let herself believe that at last they were on the path to healing. Together. The next few weeks were like watching a seedling push through the soil, fragile yet determined. With the truth finally out, a new kind of life began for Hannah, Ethan, and Matthew. No one pretended it was simple, least of all Hannah, who woke each morning bracing for all the practical and emotional challenges of merging a father into a child's world. But there was also joy. Pure, unexpected joy. Ethan at first had occasional waves of confusion or sadness over the lost years, the missed birthdays, the not knowing. Yet each time those doubts rose up, Matthew was there to reassure him, to promise he wouldn't disappear. Hannah watched in quiet awe as her son tested Matthew's commitment with small requests. Help with homework, a bike ride around the block, cheering from the sidelines of a school soccer game. And Matthew, to his credit, showed up every single time. Hannah began trusting Matthew to pick Ethan up from school some afternoons. A few eyebrows raised at the sight of the CEO leaning against the fence, holding a juice box for his son, dressed in casual clothes rather than a tailored suit. But Matthew didn't seem to mind. He often joked that if he could handle board meetings, he could handle a crowd of third graders any day. At home, Ethan sometimes asked pointed questions. "Where did you live before? Why couldn't you see me when I was little?" And Matthew answered with honest regret, explaining how he never knew Ethan existed back then. Hannah would chime in, clarifying her reasons for keeping the secret, always ensuring Ethan understood it wasn't his fault. There were tears on both sides, but each honest conversation strengthened the bond forming among them. Hannah herself rode a roller coaster of relief, gratitude, and lingering fear. She and Matthew had not yet tackled their own unresolved hurts in depth. The last argument from years ago still cast a shadow, but whenever they did tentatively address it, they found themselves moving past old resentments a little more each time, for Ethan's sake and for the fragile new chance they'd been given. One crisp Saturday, Matthew suggested a day trip to a nearby nature reserve. Ethan had been learning about local wildlife in school and jumped at the idea of spotting deer or raccoons. For Hannah, it was a leap of faith. Long hours together, away from the safety of her apartment or the city's bustle, traveling in Matthew's car. But seeing Ethan's excitement, she agreed. They set off mid-morning. In the back seat, Ethan chattered about how he hoped to see eagles or maybe even a fox. Hannah sat in the front, feeling unexpectedly comfortable. Matthew navigated out of the city, the tall buildings giving way to winding roads and autumn-tinted trees. Light filtered through golden leaves, painting the car's interior with dancing shadows. They arrived at a small visitor center, where a friendly ranger offered trail maps and pointers on spotting wildlife. Together, the three of them hiked along a gentle path. Ethan ran ahead, giggling whenever a squirrel scampered across the leaf-strewn ground. Matthew and Hannah walked side by side, sharing a thermos of coffee. She realized it was the first time in ages they'd spent more than an hour together without the tension of hidden truths. "So," he said softly at one point, "how are you feeling these days? Really feeling?" She exhaled, listening to the crunch of leaves beneath their shoes. "Better. Still cautious. But I'm glad Ethan has you now. He talks about you constantly, how Dad is teaching him new soccer moves." A faint smile tugged at her lips. "He's so proud to call you that." Matthew's gaze flicked to Ethan, who was enthusiastically poking at a patch of mushrooms just ahead. His voice went thick. "I never imagined how good it would feel to hear him say Dad. It's like all my priorities shifted. And I'm trying to handle my company's concerns, but I won't go back to the old way of living." She studied him. "I see you're making changes. I appreciate it." She paused, then murmured, "I know this is bigger than a few weeks of gestures. We have a long road, building trust for Ethan and for me too." He nodded, slowing his pace so they could talk more privately. "I'm not expecting instant forgiveness for the past. I want to earn your confidence every day, you and Ethan both." Her throat tightened with emotion, but she offered a small nod. "Keep showing up," she said simply. "That's what matters." They continued in companionable silence, eventually catching up to Ethan, who had discovered a small clearing near a creek. He begged to take off his shoes and dip his toes in the water. Hannah hesitated. October weather made for chilly water. But Matthew shrugged off his jacket and rolled up his sleeves, stepping in carefully to test the temperature first. Ethan squealed at the cold, but grinned, delighted to share the experience with his father. The image of them side by side in the creek, shivering but laughing, struck Hannah's heart with unexpected warmth. They ate a light picnic lunch on a fallen log. Hannah had packed sandwiches, and Matthew contributed fruit and snacks he'd picked up earlier. Ethan devoured his meal, then lay on the grass, proclaiming he was starfishing to soak up the sun. Hannah and Matthew shared a knowing smile over the boys' contagious joy. When the day drew toward evening, they hiked back to the car. The drive home was quieter, Ethan dozing in the back seat, worn out from fresh air and adventure. Hannah turned in her seat to check on him, sleeping peacefully, head lolling against the window. Matthew caught her soft expression. "He's happy," he said, voice low. "I never want to lose this." She glanced at him. "Then don't," she whispered. "We're here. Stay honest with us and we'll figure it out." He nodded solemnly, tightening his grip on the steering wheel. They reached Hannah's apartment after dark. She roused Ethan, who mumbled incoherently but managed to stumble upstairs with Matthew's help. Once inside, Hannah guided him to change into pajamas, and Matthew lingered in the living room, awkwardly unsure if he should go or stay until Ethan was settled. He'd never tucked the boy into bed before, an intimate act of routine family life he'd missed. Hannah returned from Ethan's bedroom, closing the door gently. She found Matthew standing by the kitchen counter, glancing at the everyday clutter, school notes, grocery lists, a pile of laundry waiting to be folded. She cleared her throat softly. "Thanks for driving today. He had a great time." Matthew exhaled. "So did I." He hesitated, gaze drifting to the hallway that led to Ethan's room. "Should I say goodnight?" Hannah weighed it, then nodded. "He's a bit sleepy, but I think he'd like that." He followed her guidance, tiptoeing into the dimly lit bedroom. Ethan was half awake, eyes fluttering as Matthew knelt by the bed. Hannah stayed by the door, heart in her throat. "Hey, buddy," Matthew whispered. "Sleep well, okay?" Ethan mumbled something that sounded like, "Night, Dad," reaching out a small hand. Matthew pressed a gentle kiss to the boy's forehead, an unpracticed gesture that seemed instinctive. Hannah clutched the doorframe, tears pricking her eyes at the simple beauty of it. Matthew slipped out, flicking off the bedroom light. They returned to the living room, both a bit emotional. Hannah cleared her throat, blinking away moisture. "He'll probably be out until morning now." Matthew gave a shaky laugh. "I remember being that tired after big outings when I was his age, though I guess I don't remember much." He paused. "Thank you for letting me tuck him in. It felt important." She nodded, unsure how to navigate the intimacy of the moment. "You're welcome." A beat passed. The air felt thick with possibility, old wounds and new beginnings. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table, perhaps a text from Jade. She grabbed it, seeing it was a promotional message from the boutique instead. Relief mingled with disappointment. Matthew shifted. "I should probably go. It's late." Hannah walked him to the door. He turned as if to say something, maybe to apologize again for the past, or to ask about their own relationship, or to simply express gratitude. In the end, he just offered a quiet, heartfelt smile. "I'll see you both soon. Let me know if Ethan wants anything, or if you need help with anything." She swallowed hard. "I will." He slipped into the hallway, and she closed the door with a soft click, leaning against it. In the hush of the apartment, she listened to Ethan's steady breathing from the bedroom. Her thoughts buzzed with the realization that they were slowly, painstakingly forming a real family unit. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was a work in progress. But for the first time in a long while, Hannah felt a calm sense that they were on the right path. Days turned to weeks. Weeks turned to months. The three of them navigated big and small hurdles. Ethan's occasional anger about the years missed, Matthew's juggling of board responsibilities while refusing to abandon fatherhood again, Hannah's guarded heart learning to trust that Matthew wouldn't run. They had arguments, tears, and moments of awkwardness, but they also had laughter. So much laughter, as Ethan repeatedly showed them how to embrace simple joys like movies on the couch or homemade pizza nights. Lucy's boutique eventually offered Hannah more stable hours. Jade continued her unwavering support, occasionally teasing Hannah about how domestic her life seemed now that she juggled co-parenting schedules. When Hannah's rent threatened to spike, Matthew quietly offered to help. This time Hannah, after a private talk, agreed to a fair arrangement that respected her independence but acknowledged his responsibility. Each compromise brought them one step closer to a shared future built on honesty and care. One late afternoon, nearly a year after Ethan first kicked that soccer ball toward Matthew's bench in Central Park, the boy raced up to Hannah in their apartment with a drawing rolled under his arm. "Mom, look!" he cried, unrolling it on the coffee table. It was a detailed family portrait, Ethan in the center, Hannah on one side, Matthew on the other, all three smiling with a soccer ball at their feet. Above them, large childlike letters spelled out, "My family." Hannah's heart constricted, eyes glistening. Before she could speak, the front door opened. Matthew stepped in, having just arrived from work. Ethan dashed over, showing him the drawing. "Dad, look, I made this at school." Matthew knelt beside his son, wonder filling his face. "Wow, that's amazing. You're an artist, buddy." Ethan beamed. "We had to draw our families. Ms. Parker said I did great on the details." Hannah approached, tears slipping down her cheeks. She and Matthew exchanged a glance of understanding. This was it. The ordinary miracle they'd fought so hard to create. The child who once asked why he had no dad now drew pictures of the three of them together, confident in the knowledge he was loved. In the corner of the page, Ethan had drawn a bench, the one where he'd first encountered Matthew. It served as a reminder of how far they'd come since that day, how a single soccer ball changed everything. Hannah wrapped an arm around both of them, letting her tears fall freely while a bright grin spread across her face. "Thank you," she whispered, voice trembling but full of gratitude. "Thank you for staying." Matthew glanced at her, then at Ethan, nodding. "Thank you for letting me." They stood there, huddled in the small living room, no longer three separate souls but a family. Imperfect, healing, and bound by love that had once been buried under years of silence. Now it flourished, like a seedling finally bathed in sunlight, proving that the hardest journeys can lead to the most beautiful destinations. If you enjoyed this story, don't miss the next one. Just click on the screen